By the spring of 453 B.C.E., the valley of the Fen River in northern China contained a lake that appeared on no map because 2 years earlier it had not existed. The lake was man-made. Beneath its surface lay the farmland, the roads, and the outer districts of a city called Jinyang. And rising out of the brown water, like the rim of a bowl that refuses to go under, stood the city's rammed earth wall, with less than the height of a standing man left between the waterline and the parapet. The man who had made that lake was named Zhi Bo, and he was, by any practical measure, the most powerful man in the Chinese world. He commanded his own clan's army and the armies of 2 allied clans, the Han and the Wei. He had turned a river into a siege engine. He did not need to storm the wall because the water was doing the work for him, a few finger widths at a time, and everyone on both sides of it knew the arithmetic. Zhi Bo believed the siege was already over. In one sense, he was correct. Within days, the siege would end. The lake would move, and within a generation, Zhi Bo's own skull would be lacquered, mounted, and used as a drinking cup by the man he was starving out. Somewhere in the middle of that reversal is a single sentence spoken out loud from a chariot on the dike by the one man in China who should never have said it, and a silent answer to that sentence, an elbow pressed into one man's side, a foot pressed onto another man's foot, that historians were still dissecting 2,000 years later. So how does a city that is 2 meters from drowning, out of food, out of allies, and out of time, end a siege of nearly 3 years in a single night, and erase the most powerful family in China so completely that the age that followed took its name from the chaos left behind? The answer has almost nothing to do with the wall. The answer is what 3 men were made to believe about the water. Here is what the surviving record allows us to reconstruct, and what this episode will walk through. First, how a river actually becomes a weapon. The dike, the diversion, and the specific engineering that put Jinyang under 2 years of rising water while its wall stood essentially untouched. Second, the sentence Zhi Bo spoke on that dike, in that chariot, with his 2 allies standing beside him, and why those few words were worth more to the defenders than 10,000 soldiers. Third, the advisor who read the coming betrayal, not in any letter or intercepted message, but in the faces of 2 men, warned his lord in precise terms, and received an answer so catastrophically foolish that he asked to be posted abroad rather than stay to watch what came next. Fourth, the midnight journey of a single envoy named Zhang Mengtam through the siege lines, and the short argument about lips, teeth, and 2 other cities that turned 2 enemy armies into allies before sunrise. And fifth, what happened on the night the water turned around. The dike guards, the breach, the 3-sided attack, and why traditional Chinese historiography treats that night as the border between 2 ages. The moment the spring and autumn period dies and the warring states begins. One note on sources before the story starts. This account survives principally in the Zhangguo Zi, the Stratagems of the Warring States, a collection of persuasions and court anecdotes assembled and edited by the Han librarian Liu Shang toward the end of the 1st century B.C.E. In the Shuji of Sima Qian, the 130-chapter universal history completed around 90 B.C.E., and in Sima Guang's Ziji Tongjian, the comprehensive mirror for aid in government, the great 11th century chronicle whose 294 chapters cover nearly 14 centuries of Chinese history, and which chooses this exact conflict as its opening subject. the very first story the Emperor of Song was meant to read. The sources disagree on the siege's length and embellish its horrors, the Zhangguo in particular being a rhetoric textbook as much as a history, and where they conflict, I will say so plainly. To understand why anyone was besieging Jinyang at all, you have to understand that the state of Jin, once the dominant power of northern China, had by the middle of the 5th century B.C.E. become a hollow shell. This was the state that had defined an era. Under Duke Wen, the wandering prince Chang'er, who spent 19 years in exile before taking his throne, Jin had crushed the southern state of Chu at Chengpu in 632 B.C.E. and made itself the acknowledged hegemon of the Chinese world, the state that presided over interstate covenants and disciplined anyone who broke them. But hegemony has running costs, and Jin paid them the way most aristocratic states do, by delegating. Its dukes handed armies, offices, and territories to a circle of great ministerial families, and generation by generation, the families kept what they were given and reached for more. The Duke of Jin still sat on his throne, still performed the rituals, still nominally ruled, and controlled almost nothing. Real power had drained downward into the hands of those families, who held their own territories, collected their own taxes, and fielded their own armies inside the state they theoretically served. At the start of the 5th century, there had been 6 of them: the Fan, the Zhonghang, the Ji, the Zhao, the Han, and the Wei, until a savage internal war, running from 497 to roughly 490 B.C.E., destroyed the Fan and Zhonghang clans and let the survivors carve up their lands. That earlier war, incidentally, had also centered on Jinyang. It began when Zhao Jianzi, head of the Zhao clan, withdrew into that same city and stood a siege there. The Zhao family had already bet its survival on Jinyang once and won. Remember that because Zhao Jianzi certainly did. By the 450s B.C.E., 4 families were left standing: the Ji, the Zhao, the Han, and the Wei. And of the 4, the Zhi clan, under its head Zhi Bo, also recorded as Zhi Yao, was the strongest by a wide margin. Zhi Bo's method for widening that margin was elegantly simple. He demanded land. In the name of restoring the strength of Jin, he required each of the other 3 clans to cede him a district of 10,000 households. Pause on that number because it is not a symbolic gift. A 10,000 household district is a tax base, a granary, and a conscription pool. At the mobilization ratios of the period, it is on the order of an army division, handed over without a battle. Every district Zhi Bo absorbed made the next demand harder to refuse, which was the entire design. It was extortion wearing the costume of patriotism, and everyone involved understood that, which is precisely why it worked. The head of the Han clan, Han Kangzi, wanted to refuse. His advisor, Duan Gui, talked him out of it, arguing that refusal would simply make Han the first target, and that it was better to feed Zhi Bo's appetite and let it fasten on someone else. Let him grow arrogant on easy successes, Duan Gui argued, and arrogance would eventually find him an enemy who fights back. Han handed over the district. The head of the Wei clan, Wei Huanzi, went through the same cycle: anger, counsel, calculation, and reached the same conclusion. Wei handed over its district. Then Zhi Bo turned to the Zhao clan and demanded the lands of Cai and Guaolang. And the head of the Zhao clan, a man named Zhao Xiangzi, said no. The refusal was not only strategy, it was personal. The 2 men had history. Years earlier, on a joint campaign against the state of Zheng, Zhi Bo had gotten drunk at a banquet and, according to the Qiji Tongjian, poured wine over Zhao Xiangzi and struck him. Xiangzi's own officers asked leave to kill Zhi Bo on the spot. Xiangzi refused, saying his father had chosen him as heir precisely because he could endure disgrace. Zhi Bo then went further and urged Zhao Jianzi to disinherit the young man entirely. When the land demand arrived, Xiangzi was being asked to fund the ambitions of a man who had humiliated him in public and tried to erase his inheritance in private. He said no, and both men understood the no as final. It is worth pausing on the one man inside the Qi camp who saw the whole disaster coming before it started. A clansman named Zhi Guo had in fact seen it coming a generation before it started. When Zhi Bo's father, Zhi Xuanzi, was choosing his heir, Zhi Guo had objected to the choice of Yao in terms the Ziji Tongjian preserves precisely. The young man surpasses other men in 5 ways: a magnificent beard and imposing stature, skill at archery and charioteering, mastery of the arts, forceful eloquence in argument, and hard, decisive courage. And he is deficient in exactly one. He is without ren, without humaneness. A man with 5 talents and no humaneness, Zhi Guo warned, will use those talents to dominate others. And who will be able to live with him? Choose Yao, and the Ji clan will surely be destroyed. He was overruled. Now, decades later, Zhi Guo watched the prophecy assembling itself in real time. He warned Zhi Bo that humiliating the other families would end in ruin, and pressed him repeatedly to either conciliate the men he was fleecing. He even proposed, quite specifically, buying the loyalty of the counselors Duan Gui of Han and Zhao Jia of Wei with a 10,000 household district apiece, on the theory that the advisors steered the lords, or destroy them outright. Anything but the middle path of injury plus survival. Zhi Bo waved him off. Why give away land, he asked, when the whole point was to take it? Zhi Guo then did something remarkable for the era. He formally separated from his own clan, went to the registrars, and changed his surname to Fu. Hold on to that detail. It becomes the difference between life and death for his descendants. Zhao Xiangzi's refusal gave Zhi Bo exactly the pretext he wanted. He summoned the armies of Han and Wei, the 2 clans he had just extorted, and marched all 3 forces against Zhao. Xiangzi could not meet that coalition in the field, and he knew it, so the question became where to stand a siege. His counselors suggested cities that were close or rich or well-stocked. The Zhangguo Ci names them. Kangzi was proposed because its walls were newly completed and thick. Xiangzi rejected it, on the reasoning that the people had just exhausted themselves building those walls and would not now die defending them. Handan was proposed because its granaries were full. Xiangzi rejected it too because the granaries had been filled by squeezing the very people who would have to man the ramparts. Both rejections apply the same principle. Fortification is a relationship before it is a structure. He chose Jinyang in the north near the site of modern Taiyuan in Shaanxi province because his father, Zhao Jianzi, had told him on precisely this point. If calamity ever comes, go to Jinyang. It is nearer than it looks. And Jianzi's confidence in his son had its own strange origin story. Xiangzi, whose given name was Wu Shu, was the child of a low-born mother, a Di tribeswoman's son ranked behind his brothers. Jianzi had tested his sons by writing precepts of governance on bamboo tablets, giving 1 to each and saying nothing more. 3 years later, he demanded them back. The elder sons had lost theirs and forgotten the words. Wu Shu recited his from memory and produced the tablet from his sleeve, where he had carried it every day. Jianzi named him heir over the objections of protocol and over the sneers of Zhi Bo. So the man defending Jinyang was a man selected, quite literally, for the ability to hold on to something for years without being reminded. The city itself had been built for this moment. It had been developed decades earlier by a steward named Dong Anyu and governed afterward by an administrator named Yin Duo, who had deliberately kept taxes light and granaries full on the theory that a loyal population is a fortification. And Dong Anyu had built loyalty into the architecture itself. According to the Zhangguo Ci, when Kangzi arrived and worried aloud that he lacked arrows, his minister Zhang Mengtan showed him that the walls of the palace compound were cored with seasoned bramble and reed stalks, which could be drawn out and cut into arrow shafts, and that the columns of the halls were cast bronze, which could be melted down for arrowheads. The city was a war reserve disguised as a town, a decades-old contingency plan waiting for its contingency. Kangzi shut the gates, and the three armies of Zhi, Han, and Wei closed around Jinyang. For a year or more, the sources give the total siege anywhere from 1 year to 3. The conventional siege failed. Assaults on the rammed walls were thrown back. Rammed earth, hung tu, is worth a moment here. Layer after layer of soil pounded inside timber frames until it approaches the density of soft stone. Walls thick enough at the base that no ram or sap of the period could do more than scratch them. Against that, 5th century siegecraft had ladders, mounds, and patience, and Jinyang's defenders, supplied with arrow shafts from inside their own walls, outlasted all three. The population did not crack, which was Yin Duo's light taxation paying its dividend. Jinyang was doing what fortified cities are designed to do, converting time into attrition against the attacker, whose 3 armies were eating through supply lines while the defenders ate through granaries. And then Zhi Bo stopped attacking the wall and looked instead at the river. The mechanism deserves to be understood properly because it is the hinge of everything that follows. Jinyang sat on low ground near the waters of the Fen River system. The sources name the Jin waters specifically, the stream flowing down from the springs west of the city. And Zhi Bo's engineers did something that required no new technology whatsoever, only labor, earth, and patience. They built dikes. They dammed and channeled the flow so that instead of running past the city, the water was directed at it and, critically, penned in around it, with embankments serving as the walls of an artificial reservoir whose center was Jinyang. The same rammed earth technique that made the city's wall unbreakable made the dikes buildable. An army has thousands of laborers, and earth is free. Then they waited for the river to do what rivers do, and they waited through at least one flood season, when the summer rains coming off the Shanxi highlands multiplied the river's flow and lifted the lake by whole body lengths at a time. The Shuji and the Zhangguo Ci agree on the result. The water rose until, in the chronicle's famous phrase, only 3 ban of wall, 3 heights of the wooden shuttering board used in wall construction, roughly 2 meters, less than the height of a man, remained above the flood. Consider what that does to a city, because none of it involves the wall failing. The wall, in fact, is the only thing working. It is holding back the lake. Everything inside it drowns by degrees. The low districts flood first, and their people crowd upward into the high ground. Hearths and ovens go under, so the chronicles record that the defenders of Jinyang hung their kettles from scaffolding to cook. The phrase in the sources is that they suspended their pots and cooked in midair. The wells foul as floodwater and waste mix into them, which means dysentery moves through a population already crowded onto rooftops and platforms. Grain stores rot from the bottom up. The Zhangguo Tse says frogs bred in the stoves. And there is a slower process working too, one the defenders could measure with a fingertip. Rammed earth is not masonry. It wicks water. 2 years of immersion softens the wall's base, and every man on the parapet knew the thing holding back the lake was itself, slowly turning back into mud. The Shiji preserves the darkest line of all, one I will report rather than endorse, since it is a stock phrase ancient chroniclers reached for at extremity, that the besieged exchanged their children and ate them. Whether that is literal fact or the formula for absolute desperation, the strategic meaning is identical. Jinyang was weeks from the end, and the wall, unbreached, unbroken, fully manned, had been made irrelevant. That is the first thing this siege teaches. Past a certain point, a wall does not protect a city. It only defines where the city drowns. But the water weapon has a property that Zhi Bo does not seem to have thought about, and it is the hidden detail on which the entire war turns. A river cannot be aimed and released like an arrow. It has to be held on target continuously by the dikes, and a dike is a fixed piece of terrain that must be garrisoned every hour of every day forever, because whoever holds the dike decides where the lake goes. Zhi Bo had not built a weapon and fired it. He had built a weapon and then camped next to it on low ground inside the same hydrology with the safety of his own army depending on a few embankments and the men guarding them. Think about the geometry. His lake stood higher than his own camp, held up by earth, and the potential energy of 2 years of impounded river was pointed at whichever side of the embankment failed first. The lake did not belong to him. It belonged to whoever held the earthworks on any given night. 3 scenes, drawn straight from the sources, show how that vulnerability was converted into a victory. The first is the scene on the dike. Zhi Bo rode out in a chariot to survey the flood, with Huanzi driving and Kangzi standing guard beside him, a staging that was itself a display of dominance, the 2 lesser lords serving as his crew, one holding the reins and one holding the weapons, in the positions a lord's own retainers would normally fill. Looking out over the drowned approaches of Jinyang, Zhi Bo said in the words the Ziji Tongjian gives him, "I did not know until today that water can destroy a man's state." As observations go, it was accurate. As a thing to say aloud in that chariot, it was suicidal. Because both of the men beside him ruled capitals that sat on rivers. The Fen River ran by Anyi, the seat of the Wei clan in the low basin of southern Shanxi. The Jiang waters ran by Pingyang, the seat of the Han. Neither city was any harder to flood than Jinyang. Both were arguably easier. Zhi Bo had not merely revealed a capability. He had announced, in front of the only 2 plausible future targets, that the capability had just occurred to him. The chronicle records what happened in the silence after the sentence. Huanzi nudged Kangzi with his elbow, and Kangzi pressed his foot onto Huanzi's foot. No words, 2 touches. In that instant, standing in their master's chariot, both men had performed the same calculation. Jinyang today is a rehearsal for Anyi and Pingyang tomorrow, and each had just confirmed that the other had performed it too. That mutual confirmation is the whole event. Either lord alone could do nothing. Each needed to know the other's mind, and open speech was impossible in a camp full of Zhi Bo's men. Zhi Bo's sentence created the one moment in the entire war when both men could exchange that information at zero risk. He had, in effect, brokered the conspiracy against himself from his own chariot. And Zhi Bo, watching his lake, noticed nothing. The second scene belongs to a man named Kangzi, an advisor in Zhi Bo's own camp, and it may be the purest recorded example of strategic warning being ignored. Kangzi came to Zhi Bo and told him flatly, "Han and Wei are certain to turn against us." Zhi Bo asked how he could possibly know that.
Kangzi's reasoning, as the Zhi Tongjian preserves it, is a small masterpiece of inference. "We have promised Han and Wei shares of Zhao's territory once the city falls," he said. "The city is now days from falling. Any man about to receive a share of a conquered state should look pleased. Look at those two lords. They show worry, not joy." What can that mean, except that they fear what comes after Zhao more than they want their share of it? Notice what Kangzi is doing. He has no informant, no document, no confession. He is reading the gap between an incentive and an expression, and treating that gap as hard intelligence, which it was. What Zhi Bo did with this analysis is almost beyond parody. At the next opportunity, he repeated it, apparently verbatim, to Han Kangzi and Wei Huanzi themselves, and asked them if it was true. The two lords, given a free preview of exactly which behaviors were arousing suspicion, denied everything smoothly. The accusation, they said, was obviously the work of Zhao agents trying to split the alliance so the Ji would waste their strength attacking their own partners on the eve of victory, and from that moment performed confidence flawlessly. Zhi Bo had not merely burned his own intelligence, he had trained his enemies to defeat it. Kangzi understood precisely what his master had just done. When Zhi Bo told him almost cheerfully how he had tested the two lords and found them innocent, Kangzi saw that the next warning would not only fail, but mark him as an enemy of the coalition. He asked to be sent as an envoy to the distant state of Qi, and the record has him leave the theater entirely, a man removing himself from the blast radius of a decision he could not reverse. The third scene is inside the drowning city, and it is the moment of maximum despair. The Zhangguo Ci shows Zhao Xiangzi at the end of his resources, food nearly gone, the sick multiplying, the water line creeping up those last 2 meters, asking his ministers, in effect, who can be saved and who must be abandoned. The questions leaders ask when they have begun to negotiate with defeat. The chronicle even records him observing that the officials' morale was breaking, that the men who bowed to him each morning were already calculating their positions under a Zhi victory. His minister Zhang Mengtan, the same man who had shown him the arrow shafts inside the palace walls, offered a different arithmetic. The coalition outside, he argued, is not one army. It is 3 armies held together by one man's fear. And fear is a rope that can be cut. Let me go out tonight. Xiangzi agreed because there was nothing left to disagree with. And so, on a night the sources do not date precisely, Zhang Mengtan was let down from the wall, crossed the flood, passed through the siege lines of the men who were killing his city, and asked for a secret audience with Han Kangzi and Wei Huanzi. What he said to them, as the Zhangguo Ci reconstructs it, took only moments, because he was not planting an idea, he was watering one that the chariot scene had already planted. He began with the proverb every man in that tent had known since childhood: when the lips are gone, the teeth grow cold. And every man in that tent knew where the proverb came from, because it came from their own state's history. 2 centuries earlier, in 655 B.C.E., Duke Xian of Jin had asked the small state of Yu for passage to attack its neighbor Guo. A minister of Yu had used those exact words to warn his lord that Guo was the lips and Yu the teeth, that Jin would devour both. The lord of Yu took Jin's bribes, granted the passage, and Jin conquered Guo, then conquered Yu on the march home. Zhang Mengtan was telling 2 ministers of Jin that they were about to play the lord of Yu in their own state's oldest cautionary tale. Zhao is the lips, he told them. You are the teeth. Tomorrow, or the day after, Jinyang falls, and the Ji, the Han, and the Wei will briefly be 3 clans dividing spoils. But you have both stood on that dike. You have both heard him say what he now knows about water. When Zhao's lands are absorbed and Zhi Bo's strength is half again what it is today, what argument, what treaty, what oath will keep the Fen River out of Anyi and the Jiang waters out of Pingyang? You are not besieging Zhao. You are digging the channels for your own floods. The 2 lords, the chronicle says, admitted they knew all of it, knew it, and feared the plan would leak before it could be executed, which tells you their hesitation was operational, not moral. They had already been accused once by Qi. A second suspicion would be fatal. Zhang Mengtan's answer closed the deal. The words leave your mouths and enter my ears alone. No third man will carry them. A date and a signal were fixed. Then the envoy went back through the lines, back across the water, and back over the wall into the city that now held the largest secret in China. The execution, when it came, was a piece of night work of almost surgical economy. On the agreed night, Zhao Xiangzi sent men out to the embankments, and here the record is specific about the target, because the target is the whole point.
They did not attack the camp. They did not attack a general. They killed the officers guarding the dikes. That handful of sentries on a rampart of earth was the single point of failure of the entire siege, the pin holding the weapon together. And once they were dead, Zhao's men cut the embankment on the far side and released the lake into the camp of the Ji army. 2 years of impounded river went looking for low ground, and the low ground was where Zhi Bo's soldiers were sleeping. The Shiji describes the Ji army waking into chaos, units abandoning weapons to fight the water itself, cohesion dissolving in the dark as men struggled to save stores and dam the breach. Understand what a night flood does to an army of that period. It does not need to drown many men. It drowns the organization. Signals cannot be heard over water. Formations cannot assemble in a swamp. Chariots mire, bowstrings soak, and every soldier's first instinct is to climb, not to fight. And into that flooded, floundering mass, the trap closed from 3 sides at once. Han Kangzi's army striking one flank, Wei Huanzi's army the other, and Zhao Shangzi himself leading the men of Jinyang, starved, half-drowned, and entirely unwilling to leave the ending to anyone else, straight out of the city into the front of the Ji line. The army that had spent 2 years watching a city drown was destroyed in a single night by its own lake and its own allies. Zhi Bo was taken and killed, and Zhao Xiangzi, the man who had endured wine poured over his head, did exactly what the opening of this story promised. He had Zhi Bo's skull cleaned, lacquered, and made into a drinking vessel, so that the most powerful man in China ended as tableware at his enemies' banquets. The vengeance did not stop at one skull.
The three victorious clans hunted down and exterminated the entire Ji lineage. The sources say more than 200 members of the family died, and divided the vast Ji territories among themselves.
One branch survived, the descendants of Zhi Bo, the man who had diagnosed Zhi Bo's fatal deficit of humaneness before he ever held power, and who had legally ceased to be a Zhi years before there was a price on the name. His paperwork at the registrar's office turned out to be the best fortification anyone in this story built. And one man refused to accept the verdict of the flood. A retainer of Zhi Bo named Yu Rang, who declared, in words the Shiji made immortal, that a gentleman dies for the one who understands him, as a woman adorns herself for the one who delights in her. Yu Rang disfigured himself with lacquer until his skin blistered beyond recognition and swallowed charcoal to ruin his voice, and twice attempted to assassinate Zhao Xiangzi, once disguised as a convict laborer in the palace privies, once lying in wait under a bridge. Caught the second time, he asked only that Xiangzi hand over his robe so that he could stab the cloth and discharge his duty to a dead lord. Xiangzi, moved, agreed. Yu Rang struck the robe 3 times, cried out that he could now face Zhi Bo in the underworld, and fell on his sword. Even the Ji clan's destruction, in other words, generated a legend of loyalty. Just not one that ever attached to Zhi Bo himself. What the 3 clans had actually done that night took another 2 generations to become official. In 453 B.C.E., they held Jin's territory in fact. In 403 B.C.E., King Wei Lie of Zhou bowed to reality and formally invested the heads of Han, Zhao, and Wei as marquises, legitimate rulers of 3 new states carved from the corpse of the old hegemon. Traditional Chinese historiography treats one or the other of those dates as the frontier between the spring and autumn period and the warring states, and Sima Guang chose 403 as the very first entry of the Ziji Tongjian precisely because he considered the Zhou king's ratification of usurpation the moment the old order's last fiction died. But the story he told first, to explain that moment, was Jinyang, and he attached to it the most famous editorial essay he ever wrote. Zhi Bo perished, Sima Guang concluded, because his talent exceeded his virtue. Talent, he argued, is the servant, and virtue the commander. A man of great virtue and small talent does limited harm, but a man of great talent and no virtue is a tiger with wings, and the wise ruler should fear the brilliant scoundrel far more than the honest mediocrity. Every gift Zhi Bo had listed at the succession, the strength, the eloquence, the decisiveness, had functioned in the end as an accelerant, and the weapon itself entered the permanent arsenal. The lesson of Jinyang, that a river held by dikes is a siege engine and that the dikes are the battle, echoed through the 2 centuries of warfare that followed until in 225 B.C.E., the Qin general Wang Ben diverted the waters of the Yellow River system against Daliang, the capital of Wei. After 3 months of flooding, the rammed earth walls dissolved, the city fell, and the state of Wei was annihilated. The state, that is, founded by the family of Wei Huanzi, the man who drove the chariot on the dike, heard the sentence about water and passed the warning along with his elbow. His descendants' capital drowned, exactly as he had feared Anyi would. At the hands of a state that had learned the lesson better than anyone. The flood he helped turn around at Jinyang came back for his house in the end, because the real lesson of 453 B.C.E. was never about water. It was that the most dangerous information in any alliance is what your partners are made to believe about your intentions. And Zhi Bo, from his own chariot, in one sentence, told them everything. If you enjoyed this journey into the night the water turned around, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button so these stories reach more people who love history's greatest reversals. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.